Dexter Morgan. He's one of the most iconic figures in TV history. If you clicked on this video, there's a good chance you know who I'm talking about, and maybe you're a fan of the show. Then you'll also know that Dexter can be both complex and terrifying, and you wouldn't want to end up on his table, staring out, unable to move, as your body is bound tightly by sheets of plastic, as Dexter's dark passenger begins to take the wheel. But it's all just a TV show, right? Well, what if there's actually some truth to it? Tonight we will explore the enigma that is Dexter Morgan and the haunting parallels between this TV show character and real-life serial killers. So sit back, get comfy, and enjoy tonight's Sleepless Night Tale. Dexter first aired in October of 2006 and was an instant hit. Played by renowned actor Michael C. Hall, the show features a forensic analyst who also happens to be a psychopathic serial killer who only kills criminals. If you've ever watched the show, you'll know how smoothly it balances story, internal monologue, and character building with a dark humor for comic relief, keeping the show both gripping and unsettling. But before its meteoric rise to fame, the concept of a vigilante homicide investigator, darkly dreaming Dexter, was a short novel by Jeff Lindsay, which was later adapted into the TV series that we know today. The original show ran for 8 seasons, ending in 2013, only to be revived in 2021 for a new spin called Dexter New Blood, and most recently, a prequel called Dexter Original Sin. So what exactly is it about this show, or more specifically about Dexter himself as a character, that keeps people hooked? Why do we keep watching when what he is doing is clearly wrong, or morally ambiguous at best? Aside from the strong acting and narrative building, Dexter has several complex character traits and developments that have captivated our curiosity over the years, which I will unpack a bit later as we explore the psychology of the character. But I believe the main reason people keep watching is that they relate to him, because the show allows the viewer to satisfy an innate sense of exacting justice and righting the wrongs of the world. Combine that with first-person narrative that keeps you right up front in what he's thinking, it makes for an extremely relatable character. It's almost like you're right there with him for the ride, fighting bad guys and cleaning the streets. You see, Dexter is acting with his own sense of moral codes, set by his adopted father, Harry's code. And it is this code that allows him to skirt outside the law and exert his own justice through being a vigilante. Just imagine it, having the freedom and courage to act outside of the grips of the law, outside of the controls of normal society. It does give a sense of power and liberation, especially so in instances where the justice system may have failed. For example, a killer getting off free due to a lack of evidence. The show exploits these scenarios and creates a sense of moral duty and justice, which allows the viewer to sympathize with Dexter's actions, even though he's breaking the law, because it's serving a higher purpose, Harry's code. But when we pull back the curtain, the reality is, Dexter is not killing people because he has a sense of justice and righting all the wrongs of the world, cleaning up the streets of Gotham like a proverbial Batman. No, Dexter kills because Dexter likes to kill, needs to kill. He's a psychopathic serial killer with an addiction to feed his urge for blood. Always blood. Because tonight is the night, and everything is perfect. It's easy to look past the moral dilemma while still loving and supporting a character like Dexter, because it's all just a TV show, right? Well, what happens when it isn't just a TV show? What would it be like if this were to happen in real life? Let's take a step back to the year 1968 and find out. Pedro Rodrigues Filho A 14-year-old Brazilian boy is about to avenge a grave injustice. His father had been wrongly fired from his job at a local school by the deputy mayor of his hometown, Santa Rita. Filho's father was accused of stealing food, causing him to lose his job. Young Filho had reason to believe that the real perpetrator was the school's security guard, and the two conspired against his father. He marched into town brandishing a shotgun and took the lives of both the deputy mayor and the security guard before fleeing to a different part of town. But Filho's killing spree did not stop there. What the public didn't know at the time is that Pedro Filho had grown up with a mental condition fairly similar to that of Dexter Morgan. He was allegedly a psychopath, exposed to violence at a very young age. At the age of only 13, he almost murdered one of his cousins by pushing him into a sugarcane press. Luckily, the boy survived, but young Pedro's lack of empathy meant he was fully comfortable with hurting others without feeling any guilt or remorse if he felt that the person deserved it. Following his first two kills, Filho took an unexpected turn to focus channeling his dark urges on drug dealers, sex offenders, and other criminals of his town, feeling a compulsion to target those who, in his eyes, deserved it. Sound familiar? The local press dubbed him Pedrino Matador, Little PT Killer, and he is said to have murdered over 70 criminals in the 4 years following his first two victims. But this did not go unnoticed. Not long after word got around, his then pregnant girlfriend became a target of a vengeful gang. Unfortunately, she was murdered as an act of retaliation against Filho, which only enraged him further. He was said to have taken revenge and killed the entire gang responsible for her death. This act of vengeance and simultaneous vigilantism caught the public eye, and as a result, he was both feared and renowned for his public service. I'd love to say that his path of violence ended here, but things would soon take a much darker turn. Filho was arrested and sentenced to prison in 1973. He would eventually end up serving 34 years for 70 convictions, although he claimed to have killed over 100 criminals during his spree. But that's not the darkness I'm talking about. No, that came later, during his incarceration. You see, Pedro's father, in a fit of rage, ended up killing his wife, Pedro's mother, with a machete, leading to him also being imprisoned in the exact same facility as his son. What came next was a terribly dark series of events, and I must warn you, if you're squeamish or eating at the moment, you might want to skip past this next bit. When Pedro caught wind of his mother's death and found out that his father would be sentenced to the same prison, he devised a sinister plan to avenge his deceased mother. He showed up at his father's prison cell, overpowered him, and stabbed him 22 times. But this dark deed did not end there. After doing this, he proceeded to carve out his father's heart. And in the words of Filho himself, "I just chewed it. I cut the tip of his heart off and chewed it, and I threw it on top of his body." Closing off this grim chapter and adding one final victim to Filho's ever-growing body count. Following these events, Filho's sentence racked up to over 400 years behind bars, but due to a technicality in the Brazilian legal system of how long someone can be incarcerated for at a time, he only ever ended up serving around 30 years. Eventually, in 2007, he was released. Now, I'm no expert in Brazilian law, but if you know anything about this law and why you think they let him go, feel free to share it in the comments. Now, you might think that such a dark past would leave a lasting impact on someone, and with having such a history, someone would not be able to change. And you'd be right, because this would not be Filho's final run-in with the law. Just a few years later, in 2011, he was once again arrested for crimes committed in Sao Paulo, and he would serve another 7 years behind bars before finally being released for good in 2018. At this point in his life, strangely enough, Filho's story took an unexpected turn. He made the decision to become a YouTuber. Yeah, you heard me right. He started a YouTube channel in which he would turn over his life to helping others, turning away from a life of crime and sharing his thoughts on recent crimes and his experiences throughout his life, giving us an even closer look into the dark and twisted world of a real-life serial killer. He continued to post until his eventual passing in March of 2023. Given the resemblance between Filho's actions and that of the character Dexter, the public drew similarities between the two, with many calling him the Brazilian Dexter. Although the show's creator and author, Jeff Lindsay, has never formally confirmed that the character of Dexter was inspired by Pedro Rodrigues' Filho, leaving us to speculate and draw our own conclusions. Which brings us back to the main topic at hand. It's one thing for life to inspire works of fiction, but what if it's the other way around, and disturbing material like the show Dexter begins to influence fans of the series? Well, it can lead to some pretty twisted outcomes. You see, some fans have not been able to separate fact from fiction, which brings us to our next story of the real-life Dexter copycat. Mark Twitchell, an amateur filmmaker in Edmonton, Canada, was completing his latest work on a film in which he had rented a vacant garage in a quiet part of town. Mark packed up, cleared the site, and went home, where he began to browse a website. Plentyoffish.com, a dating site. He exchanged messages with a would-be date he was looking to meet up with and signed off. He went to bed for the night, closed his eyes, and went to sleep. Meanwhile, another man somewhere in Edmonton, John Altinger, was also using the dating site. He too exchanged messages with a potential date, and he was arranging to meet up with a woman called Jen he had met online. Both men had no idea that they had set things in motion that would ruin their lives forever. John informed his friends of his intentions to meet this woman and shared a location as a safety precaution, and he left the house to go meet her. Here is the exact message with directions that John received. Upon arrival, he made his way to the location in the description, climbing under the half-open garage door, and quietly he crept inside. He called out nervously, "Hello?" But there was no answer. Quietly, he moved further into the dark room, where he noticed a light was on somewhere ahead. But before he could make it over to see what it was, he felt a shooting pain in the back of his head, instantly paralyzing him. Before John even realized what was happening, it was all over in a flash. Someone had hit him on the back of the head and proceeded stabbing him multiple times. A few days later, John's friends who were informed of his whereabouts received an odd email from him saying that he was going on an unplanned vacation to Costa Rica with his date, a woman he had just met. It also said that he'd be gone for a few weeks. Clearly, this was out of character for John, so the concerned friends went to his apartment to see for themselves what was going on, only to find that things seemed really out of place, and this was just not adding up. His passport and suitcase were still there. They called the police, who were very quickly able to piece together and understand what had happened here, solving the mystery in just 2 weeks. It turned out that the woman John had been speaking to was none other than Mark Twitchell, and the location John had disappeared from was the very same garage used in the film location. Eerily enough, the film that Mark had been shooting in that location had a remarkably similar kill scene to how it had unfolded in real life, and his method of luring the victim was something that Mark had been inspired to do by something he saw on the show Dexter. The evidence that helped fast-track the case was a testimony of a previous victim who had escaped the exact same setup only 1 week earlier. After being attacked by what he described as a masked man. When police tracked down and questioned Twitchell, his story was full of holes, prompting a deeper investigation that uncovered a mountain of evidence against him. Firstly, he was in possession of John's car, which he told the investigators that John had sold to him for $40 before going to Costa Rica. Furthermore, they found John's blood in the trunk. Plus, at the garage, they uncovered huge amounts of bloodstains that had been cleaned with chemicals, but still showed up under luminol testing. And to top it off, they found a hockey mask, the same mask that the previous victim had reported in his first failed attack only 1 week prior. But probably the most damning part of all of this evidence was what they found on Mark Twitchell's laptop, a deleted file called SK Confessions. And here is what it said.
This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer. Like anyone just starting out in a new skill, I had a bit of trial and error in the beginning of my misadventures. Allow me to start from the beginning, and I think you'll see what I mean. I don't remember the exact place and time it was that I decided to become a serial killer, but I remember the sensation that hit me when I committed to the decision. It was a rush of pure euphoria. I felt lighter, less stressed if you will, at the freedom of the prospect. There was something about urgently exploring my dark side that had greatly appealed to me. And I'm such a methodical planner and thinker, the very challenge itself was enticing to behold.
Yeah, quite disturbing when you know it was a real-life serial killer confession. It was eventually revealed that Mark had been inspired by the show Dexter and turned his film set into a real murder room. There were even plastic sheets covering parts of the room, not unlike Dexter's kill rooms in the show, showing a great deal of pre-planning that went into this horrific deed. With all these dark events surrounding the show Dexter, it really begs the question, why are people so drawn to Dexter Morgan still? And is there really such a thing as a moral serial killer? It's something I've sat and pondered many times, and maybe you have a strong feeling about this. Let me know in the comments if you do. And I feel like there are two schools of thought here. There's the ethical standpoints, like what is morality and how did we arrive at what we consider is right and wrong, and why then is Dexter evaluated with a double standard compared to how we would view other serial killers. And then there's the deep psychological aspect of relatability, why Dexter's character makes people empathize with him. And I think the combination of these two things allows his continued support and popularity. But what exactly is it about this show that makes it so influential? Let's look at the psychological aspects first. And I must warn you, there are many spoilers here, so if you haven't seen the original show and you still want to, this might spoil a few big reveals in the show. So we know Dexter's psychology is complex. There's an empathy born from his childhood causing us to pity him and want us to nurture young Dexter because of the trauma of him witnessing his mother's murder. The theme of surviving a great trauma is something that a lot of people can relate to, and it almost makes us understand what led to Dexter becoming the adult that he is in the show. So there we have the first aspect at play, empathy. We empathize with Dexter on a human level, which makes us look at his actions without the same level of scrutiny and judgment that we would otherwise employ. Secondly, there's the inner monologue throughout the show, which really makes us feel part of his journey, and it makes his experiences very personal for the viewer. It really puts us in his shoes. Lastly, Dexter struggles with many of the same difficulties that most people do, struggling with his identity and understanding who he is. He has difficulties and awkwardness in his day-to-day relationships, and the mask that he puts up in his social interactions is very reminiscent of how a lot of us interact in our own daily lives, never revealing our true selves. These psychological aspects of Dexter's character, pity, empathy, personal familiarity, this sets the stage for downplaying our moral judgment. and the show leans in hard with this in the following ways. Moral ambiguity. The show points out real flaws and injustices within the legal and criminal justice system. Killers, rapists, drug dealers, and all kinds of other bad guys get off scot-free because of technicalities or lack of evidence, even though there's an overwhelming certainty of someone's guilt. This anger and need to make things right makes Dexter the perfect vigilante, because he's an insider with law enforcement, but it also taps into our need to protect the innocent by stopping the guilty. The show proceeds to put these two things, empathy for Dexter and moral ambiguity, head to head, where we need to mentally balance breaking the law with saving lives. And most people tend to be on the side of saving innocent lives and protecting others, even if it means we bend the rules. Which brings us to the final aspect I'd like to discuss tonight: morality itself, and the importance of self-control. There's a very fine line between morality and justice. Dexter Morgan may have his lovable and quirky attributes and seemingly cleaning up the streets from bad guys with his vigilante actions. And yes, that may be saving lives and protecting the innocent, which in itself is a good thing, but I believe it's important to remember that if someone really were to do this in real life, like we saw in the case of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, there are very real legal implications to be aware of, and ethical dilemmas that a person would have to live with. On the one hand, I feel strongly about protecting innocent people, and it's easy to use justifications when the person doing the killing believes they're acting in a justified way, but I also believe that murder is murder and killing someone is morally wrong, regardless of the justifications used. So I'd like to know, what are your thoughts on the morality of a serial killer who only kills bad guys? Would you accept it? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to know your thoughts. Until then, I'll be enjoying my guilty pleasure of the next season of Dexter. Thanks for watching, and good night.